and joining me now is former Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Buttigieg, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, it is great to have you here. Let's start where I left off, in part with Senator Vance. We were talking about the situation in Springfield, Ohio. He has blamed the Biden-Harris administration and its policies for the fact that there has been an influx of Haitian migrants. It's the result of a policy called temporary protective status, which allowed hundreds of thousands of Haitian migrants who have been fleeing poverty and violence to potentially seek shelter here. The Springfield, Ohio mayor told NBC that immigrants have put a strain on resources. How do you respond to those officials in Springfield and other cities who are, quite frankly, concerned about a strain on resources?
Yeah, a community like Springfield, Ohio is dealing with rapid economic growth and rapid population growth, some of it connected to immigration. And the mayor there, just as I was dealing with challenges when I was mayor in South Bend, Indiana, is focused on how to bring a community together, move it forward, and help it grow. What is not going to help that mayor, what is not going to help that community, is the kind of chaos inflicted on them by a national campaign deciding to make them a lightning rod over wild rumors and urban legends about people eating cats or dogs or geese or whatever it's going to be tomorrow. And let's be very clear. That community and the very real people who are dealing with some really ugly stuff right now, like the bomb threats, are having that inflicted on them as part of the strategy from a campaign that wants to talk about anything but their actual record and their actual agenda. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance cannot afford for this campaign to be about things like how Donald Trump eliminated the right to choose and continues to leave the door open to signing a national abortion ban. They definitely don't want this campaign to be about things like how we had a manufacturing recession under Donald Trump and what we have to do to keep the manufacturing boom that is going on right now going. These are not things they want to be talking about. Obviously, they don't want to be talking about the particulars of the Trump-Vance healthcare plan because they don't have one. They have this so-called concept of a plan that he keeps saying is around the corner. He's been saying that, I think, for 9 years. So they need to get us talking about something else. The crazier, the better. And they go for something that is so outrageous that you actually can't ignore it. The media can't ignore what's going on because very real pain has been inflicted and fear, by the way, on people in this community and other communities around the country. Yeah. And yet, if we take the bait and are completely diverted by it, then we're not talking about what this campaign is supposed to be about, which is the future of the American people.
Let's talk about some of the policies. President Biden did issue some of the most restrictive executive actions on immigration of any Democrat, frankly, after illegal boarding crossings reached historic levels. That did anger some Democrats who said the asylum restrictions went too far. If Vice President Harris is elected, should she keep those executive actions in place?
Well, I think her response is going to reflect the conditions and the reality, just as President Biden was forced to take steps that are a response to the reality that we experienced with the post-COVID migration surge, plus, of course, the failure of Congress to act. Let's remember, we wouldn't be here in this particular situation if Donald Trump hadn't intervened to sabotage a bipartisan deal that was worked out with Republicans and Democrats on what to do at the border. And by the way, that legislation and the executive action, it's true, is more conservative than what some in the Democratic Party would like to do. But again, we're not having a serious policy debate about immigration or any other issue. If you got J.D. Vance on your program, basically debating exactly how racist it is to talk about the things that Laura Loomer's talking about, this is the kind of sideshow that they want to take the main stage so that they don't have to talk about anything serious. And it's a reminder of just how exhausting it was to deal with all this the first time Donald Trump was president. America would be in for another 4 years of this exhausting chaos every time we check the news if they come back into power.
Let me zoom out and ask you, broadly speaking, obviously this has been the topic of discussion. Vice President Harris has shifted her position on several policy issues. When she first ran for president in 2019, she initially wanted to ban fracking. Now she doesn't. She initially wanted civil penalties instead of criminal for illegal border crossings. Now she doesn't. She supported Medicare for all. Now she doesn't. To those voters who have concerns about this, given her shifts in policy positions, if she's elected, why won't she change her mind again?
Well, look, you develop your policies based on what you see happening in the world around you and what you're able to accomplish in Washington. You take the example of immigration. We just talked through what's changed over the last 5 years. We could say the same thing on climate. Lots of ideas were being kicked around 5 years ago when there was basically zero climate policy during the Trump years. Now we have a climate policy. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It does not include a ban on fracking because that's not the Biden-Harris administration's policy. But what it has done is cause a lot of factories to be built right now in places like where I grew up and places like where J.D. Vance grew up, creating jobs in a new energy economy, as well as a lot of good old-fashioned building trades and constructions jobs that would be destroyed if Donald Trump follows through on his promise to get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. So those are the actual policies we're actually working with. And every election is about the future and not the past. And that future looks very different depending on who's about to win.
But just to follow up, I think voters do have a lot of questions about the vice president's policies, how specifically she sees her administration. She sat down for her first solo interview on Friday. She was asked about how a Harris administration would differ from a Biden administration. Here's what she had to say.
My approach is about new ideas, new policies that are directed at the current moment. And also, to be very honest with you, my focus is very much in what we need to do over the next 10, 20 years to catch up to the 21st century around, again, capacity, but also challenges.
Does the vice president need to give more specifics to that answer, how a Harris administration would differ from a Biden administration if she wants to win this election?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can go on her website. You can get specifics on everything from the exact percentage point that she thinks is appropriate for the capital gains tax to how she's going to make sure more housing is built in this country. And I'm sure over the coming days in the campaign, there will be more conversations that bring even more details to light. She's also a pragmatic person who knows that, you know, the reality of policy is that there's a give and take around your core values, principles, and goals in order to get things done. And that's certainly been the experience of the last 4 years, where, you know, the policy framework we've emerged with isn't, you know, something that was set in stone in a presidential campaign and then turned in every particular into reality. But here's what I'll say. When it comes to policy, there are very clear and very specific differences, right? Donald Trump is for tax cuts for the rich and for tariffs that economists estimate will add about $4,000 a year to the cost for American families. She believes in making the wealthy pay their fair share, and she's put out the exact percentage point that she wants to bring that to so that they are paying their fair share. Right. Donald Trump eliminated the right to choose and will likely build on that. You couldn't even get a straight answer out of J.D. Vance right now on whether he would veto a national abortion ban. And you definitely didn't get a straight answer out of J.D. Vance right now on what his health care plan is going to be. So, you know, any conversation about policy, it's very clear what the differences are, but we've got a lot of unanswered questions on the Trump side. The best way to answer those questions is to look at what promises he actually did keep when he was president, which was tax cuts for the rich and ending the right to choose.
Worth noting that, of course, Biden-Harris administration left those Trump tariffs in place. Just very quickly, about 10 seconds, Mr. Buttigieg, as you know, Trump does better on the economy than Vice President Harris. Is she running out of time to make her case?
Well, she's going to keep making her case, and I think the more Americans contemplate the difference between his economic vision of tax cuts for the rich and hers of standing with workers and the middle class, the more they're going to like our economic message and not their unpopular Project 2025 vision.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.